Hi, I'm going to show you how to make a MayaWrap accordion fold style folded sling. Before you begin, make sure that you've read the Fabric and Rings Frequently Asked Questions document and also the text document showing you how to do this. It's a lot easier if you can anticipate what's happening next. So the first thing you want to do once you have an appropriate fabric and you've cut it to the correct width that you're going to need is to hem the edges. I like about a 1/2 inch hem. You can buy hemming feet for a lot of machines that make it faster. However, they tend to be too narrow for the kind of fabrics that are appropriate for slings. You can also use an iron and fold and press and then come back to your machine and sew. I'm a lot lazier than that. I don't like to iron unless I absolutely have to, so I tend to fold as I go, and I'm just going to show you a couple feet's worth of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is fold down a little bit less than 1/2 inch and then fold over again. So I've got about a 1/2 inch hem, and none of this has to be terribly precise. A wider hem I think is more comfortable for baby's legs, especially if you have it on the inside. You can choose to have the hem either on the right side of the fabric, or if you don't want it to show in the body of the sling, you can fold it under and have it on the wrong side. I prefer to have it on the right side, just so that it's not digging into your baby's legs. So what I'm going to do is I've got my needle moved over a little bit so that it's going to be on the edge of the fabric when I'm lined up with the side of the foot. I make a lot of use of my foot as a guide. So I'm going to lower the needle into the fabric, maybe take a couple of stitches and just kind of anchor it there so that I can hold on to this and pull. And what I'm actually doing, camera setup is not excellent, is I just fold as I go. So I'm going to turn under while it's held there and do a little finger press, and most fabrics that are appropriate for a sling will take a finger press pretty nicely. So I've got a good straight hem there, and then I'm just going to sew. I'm using a relatively long stitch. You don't have to use a short stitch for hemming because it's not a weight-bearing seam. I think it looks a little bit nicer if it's a longer stitch as opposed to a shorter one. I'm using the yellow thread here so that you can see what's going on. So I've stopped, the needle is down. I'm just going to refold that and then stitch some more. And this is, reasonably time consuming, but I think less so than ironing. So I've just got a short piece so you can see how I tend to hem. And, it doesn't have to be perfect. No one's going to be 3 inches from your sling and critiquing your hem, as long as it's enclosed and you've got the whole thing hemmed over. So after you've hemmed, and I am doing this a second time because I ran out of space the first time, so just a quick tear of this. This is a lightweight denim. It does tear reasonably easily across the width, which I find helpful in going to length. So if you've read the document, you'll see that I recommend an even number of pleats for this. That allows the fabric to open out nicely on your back. So I've already measured this, and it's 30 inches wide, which means I'm going to make 6 pleats, and each one of them is going to be about 5 inches deep. So I've got a ruler sort of fixed to the side of my sewing machine. I find that very, very helpful. And what I'm going to do is just fold this up and finagle it until it's at 5 inches. I've got a 5 here and a 10 here, so I know that is 5. And this doesn't have to be incredibly precise. Again, no one is going to be critiquing your sewing, and it's not going to be any less safe if the pleats are not exact. For this other side, I'm just going to grab my measuring tape and play with it until it's 5 inches. And there we go. You're going to be starting with the right side of your fabric up, so when you make this first fold, it's going to be the wrong side. And then I like to sort of pinch right along where I've got that hemmed edge, and just kind of finger press down again. Flip this up, line up these 2 folds, and then again pinch this, bring it up, and then this one can come down. And it's not perfect, but it doesn't need to be. As long as it's safe, That's what matters. And it's not going to be any less safe if these don't line up perfectly. So the next thing we're going to do is baste these folds in at this end. And I tend to go about a quarter to a third of an edge from, an inch rather, from this ripped or cut edge. For a basting stitch, most machines have a stitch length that goes from 0 to 5. And then they also have a tension adjustment that adjusts the needle thread tension here. I like to go with a length of 5. That's the longest stitch. So if it doesn't, if your machine is like 0 to 7 or whatever, go to 7, and then reduce the tension to fairly low. My machine goes from 0 to 9. Most machines have you sew at about 4 or whatever the center is for normal stitching, and then for a basting stitch go fairly low, and that will allow you to take out the bobbin thread once you no longer need this basting stitch. And you don't need to back tack this because we're going to take this out. Just remember to put your tension back up to normal before you start sewing again. Now if you have a serger, you can serge this edge and look a little bit neater. If you don't, I like to use a pretty wide but compressed zigzag stitch. So the width on my stitches can go from 1 to 7. I'm using a 7. And then the length of the stitch can go from about 0 to 5, and I've got about 1.5 here. This might be adjusted with a lever or a knob. It's digital on this machine, but however you do it, go ahead and change it. And this machine also does a little automatic knot and cuts, which I love. Otherwise you're going to have to obviously clip your thread. And then you can just trim away the messy looking stuff here. Now you can make this look a little bit neater if you use bias tape or something along this edge. That'll make a more finished edge. Plus, if you want to switch shoulders so that this is now showing, you'll probably want to do something like that. A word on shoulders. This is meant to be worn with, once it's threaded, one part of this flipped out as a shoulder cap. That helps the sling stay in the right place on your shoulder. It also makes it a little bit wider, so it's more comfortable. So it does matter which side you're going to flip out. If you tend to wear on your right shoulder, and that's usually right-handed people, because then your baby ends up on your left hip and it gives your right hand that freedom of movement, then you're going to fold out to the right. And if you're going to wear on your left shoulder, if you're left-handed or you want your left hand free, then you're going to fold out to the left. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to make sure that the right side stays free. And we're going to do another basting stitch. So what I'm going to do is fold this out of the way, all the way to the edge if I can, and then measure about 6 inches from this cut edge. And I'm just going to use a pin to mark it once up here, and then again further down so that I get a relatively straight line. If you can't follow the weft lines on your fabric, then you can use a piece of paper, just line one edge up here and then mark with chalk the straight line there. I don't usually do that. We're going to do another basting stitch so it's nice and long, and I've got the bobbin, or rather the needle thread tension reduced. And again, I'm not back tacking, so I can take these out easily. Now you're going to want to feel with your fingers where the edge of your folds are and not stitch past that. I'm actually going to go a little bit shy of that, so you can see I haven't stitched all the way to the edge. So that's our basting stitch, and now we're ready to sew in the rings. I've got a pair of sling rings here. If you don't use sling rings, just make sure that the rings that you are using are strong enough for a sling and hopefully without any weird dangerous metal content. So what I'm going to do is just make sure that this shoulder flap is all free of where I'm going to stitch. Sorry about that. And then starting at the folds here, and this is on the reverse, I like to use this basting stitch as a guide for sewing this straight. So I've got the cut edge here lined up with the basting stitch here. This is one that, I hadn't put my needle tension back. You want to make sure that you do that, otherwise the stitching can come out more easily. This one you are going to want to back tack. Mine does that automatically. If yours doesn't, you're going to have to push reverse. So watch what it does. It goes forward a few stitches, back a few more, and that secures the stitching line so it doesn't come out in washing or wearing. And I'm just going to sew a nice straight line across here. When I get to the end, slow down, do another back tack. If you're using a very thick fabric, they make something called a jig, which is a silly name, but that can help you kind of start out in the right place on this. If you have a machine like this, the foot will actually, it's got a little button that you push, and then the foot doesn't go like that. It just makes it a little easier to start and then stop sewing. So here's where that basting stitch comes in handy. I can take my stitch ripper, just get under there, and very easily pull that bobbin thread out. And my basting stitch is gone. So we're going to do at least 3 lines of stitching to hold in the rings. I recommend at least 3. You can go 4. More than that you don't need. I would recommend more than 2 just in case one fails. It's unlikely, but you know, better safe than sorry. So I'm just going to do another straight stitch with a back tack. Remember to hit reverse if your machine doesn't do that by itself. And you can kind of use the side of your foot as a guide. Just keeping it an even distance. And then again, you're going to want to feel for the bump that indicates the edge of the folds so that you're not going beyond those. Now at this point, you could do a decorative stitch if your machine does those, or you can just do another 1 or 2 straight lines. Whatever you do, you just want the stitching to be secure so that it lasts a long time. And you know, you can leave it like that to make a little pattern, or do another line of stitching. Whatever you think looks best. And I like to have some small scissors to trim off these threads. I found that when I was using my regular scissors, I more often than not would catch the fabric in them, and then of course you have to start fresh, which is no fun for anybody. So there's the reverse, and then here's what it looks like with the shoulder cap flipped out for wearing. And that's the reason that we have an even number of pleats. If we had done an odd number of pleats, this would be more like this, and then, well, I mean, obviously, well, it's hard to visualize on this, but when you wear it, this would be on this side, and then you wouldn't be able to pull it out to thread it correctly. So when you're threading one of these, you want to make sure that this shoulder cap part is open. Trace one edge all the way around, and this is, I probably need to pull back. And then the wrong side of your fabric is going to show in the tail of the sling, and that's why I like having the hem on the right side, because I think that the tail shows a lot more than the body of the sling, which tends to be kind of scrunched up anyway. So you're gonna, sorry, I'm doing this really fast, go through both rings and then pull through just the bottom ring there. And what I like to do anytime I'm threading a sling, or when I take off a sling and go to put it away, is just make sure that this is really nicely spread out. That makes it a lot easier to adjust because you're not fighting against a big tangle of fabric in the rings. So it's really nicely gathered in there. This shoulder flap is folded out so that when you're wearing it, you know, if you imagine my fist here is the shoulder, this will keep it in place. And you can see that this works best on one shoulder rather than the other. If you do want to reverse it, it's going to end up with most of the pleats on the outside of your shoulder, which is why I think it's better to have maybe, since you're making it yourself, make yourself 2, and then you can have 1 for each shoulder if you like, or you can wear it inside out if you've done some kind of edge finish on here. And that's not too bad, besides these little stray threads which you can cut off. But that is how you do the simple accordion folded sling. I hope that's been helpful. Thank you.